None of you belong to me. Not one. My father's voice cracked as he said it, standing at the head of our Thanksgiving table, a folded piece of paper trembling in his hand like it weighed 100 pounds. I'm Claire, 34, and I need to tell you about the Thanksgiving that blew my family apart over turkey and my grandmother's good china. We were in our old brownstone in Boston, the one my dad has lived in since before I was born. My two brothers, Daniel and Ryan, were there with their wives. Mom was serving pie like it was any other year. Then Dad stood up, and everything stopped. He'd taken a home DNA kit, just curious about ancestry. What came back wasn't ancestry. It was a paternity result. 0% match, not with me, not with Daniel, not with Ryan. But here's what still keeps me up at night. The three of us are 100% full biological siblings to each other. So if he's not our father, whose children are we? Who has my mother been protecting for 34 years? If you were sitting at that table, watching the man who taught you to ride a bike, who walked you down the aisle, realize he might not share your blood, would you have grabbed that paper too? Am I in the wrong for needing to know the truth, even if it destroyed him? Stay with me, because what we uncovered next was worse than any of us imagined. Comment your theory below, and subscribe. This story is far from over. Let me back up for a second, because you need to understand who my dad is before I tell you what happened after that paper hit the table. My dad, Robert, is not a flashy man. He's a retired high school history teacher. He drives a 15-year-old Volvo he refuses to replace. He remembers every single one of our birthdays, every school play, every heartbreak. When I was 19 and got dumped 2 weeks before prom by a guy I'd been dating for a year, my dad drove 4 hours round trip just to bring me my favorite dumplings because he said, sadness needs good food. That's who raised me. That's who raised all three of us. So when he stood there holding that paper, his hands shaking, and said, none of you belong to me, the room didn't just go quiet. It went dead. My sister-in-law actually dropped her fork. Ryan's wife started crying before anyone even understood what was happening. My mother, Linda, went white. Not pale white. Like every drop of blood had left her face at once. And she didn't say, that's impossible. She didn't say, let me see that. She just sat down. Slowly. Like her legs had stopped working. That silence told me more than any test result could have. Linda, my dad said, and his voice was so quiet I almost didn't hear it over my own heartbeat. Whose are they? My mother didn't answer. She just stared at her plate like it might have the answer written on it. I want you to understand something about me. I'm the oldest. I've spent my whole life being the one who fixes things, who smooths things over, who asks the hard question nobody else wants to ask. So I asked it. Mom, look at me. Who is our father? She looked up, and I watched something in her break. It doesn't matter, she whispered. Robert is your father. He's the one who raised you. That's not what I asked. The room felt like it was closing in. Daniel, my usually calm, unbothered younger brother, slammed his hand on the table hard enough to make the wine glasses jump. Mom, 34 years. You let this man believe we were his for 34 years, and you're going to sit there and tell us it doesn't matter? That's when my dad said something I will never forget as long as I live. He looked at my mother, and his voice broke completely. I always wondered, he said. After Claire was born, my doctor told me. He told me I probably couldn't have biological children. Low count. Some issue from a mumps infection when I was a teenager. I never told you I knew that, Linda. I thought maybe the doctors were wrong. I thought maybe it was a miracle. I chose to believe in a miracle for 34 years. If you're watching this and you have a parent who chose you every single day, even with doubts, sit with that for a second. He knew. He suspected. And he stayed anyway. He loved us anyway. Every lunch packed, every late night pickup, every I'm proud of you, he gave us that while carrying a secret fear that we might not be his. And my mother let him carry it alone. I couldn't breathe. I actually had to excuse myself and stand in the hallway of that old brownstone, staring at the same wallpaper that's been there since I was 5 years old, trying to figure out how the woman who taught me to braid my hair could have kept something like this buried for so long. When I came back, Ryan was the one pushing now. Ryan, the baby of the family, the one who never rocks the boat, was standing over Mom with his phone in his hand. "I'm going to ask you one more time," he said. "And if you don't answer, I'm calling Uncle Mike right now and asking him myself." And that's when my mother's face changed again. Not surprise this time. Fear. Uncle Mike. My dad's best friend since college. The man who was at every single birthday party, every graduation, every Thanksgiving for as long as I could remember. The man who taught Daniel how to throw a curveball. The man who walked me to my car after my college move-in day because my dad had to work a shift. "It's not Mike," my mother said, too fast. Way too fast. But Daniel, sharp as ever, caught it immediately. "Nobody said it was Mike. Why did you say his name?" The room went absolutely silent again. My dad's face, already destroyed, seemed to collapse even further. 29 years of friendship. 29 years of trust. And in that hallway of a silence, I watched my father understand exactly who had betrayed him. Before a single word was confirmed, my mother finally broke. She told us everything, right there at that Thanksgiving table, tears running down her face, ruining the makeup she'd carefully done that morning for a holiday that was supposed to be about gratitude. She and Mike had a brief affair, years before I was born, before she even married my dad, when things between her and my father were rocky, and she wasn't sure they'd last. She got pregnant with me during that time. She panicked, patched things up with my dad, and never told him. And then this is the part that made my stomach turn. Instead of ending it there, the affair continued off and on for years. Daniel came 7 years after me. Ryan came 4 years after that. Both times, she said, it just happened. Both times, she chose silence over honesty. For over a decade, my mother lived a double life inside the same marriage, inside the same house my dad still lives in today, and let her best friend's husband, my father, build an entire identity as dad around 3 children who were, biologically, another man's. If you're keeping score, that's not one betrayal. That's a pattern. That's a decision, made 3 separate times, to let a devoted man keep loving children he might not have fathered, rather than face one honest, painful conversation. I looked at my mother and asked the question that had been building in my chest since that paper hit the table. "Does Mike know?" Her answer nearly knocked the wind out of me. "Yes," she said. "He's always known. 29 years. Every holiday, every family barbecue, every time Uncle Mike hugged my dad and called him his brother, he knew." He sat across from the man he was betraying and pretended to be his best friend. He watched my father raise 3 kids that might have shared his blood, and he said nothing. Not once. I felt something shift in me right then. Something cold and sharp. This wasn't just my mother's secret anymore. This was a conspiracy 2 people had maintained for almost 3 decades, dressed up in Christmas sweaters and birthday cards signed, "Love, Uncle Mike." My dad hadn't said a word in almost 10 minutes. He just sat there, staring at nothing, that folded paper still clutched in his hand. Finally, he looked up, and what he said broke something in all 3 of us. "I don't care whose blood is in your veins," he said, looking at me, then Daniel, then Ryan. "I raised you. I know your first words. I know your fears. I know which one of you still sleeps with a nightlight at 31. He looked pointedly at Ryan, who let out a broken, watery laugh despite everything. "You are mine. That will never change. But I need to know why I was the only one who didn't get to decide that for himself." That question hung in the air, and nobody had an answer good enough for it. Here's where things took a turn none of us expected. 2 days after Thanksgiving, my mother called me, crying, saying Mike had reached out to her not out of guilt, but out of fear. Turns out Mike's own marriage had been falling apart for over a year, and his wife, my Aunt Patricia, had recently changed her will, cutting him out almost entirely after learning he'd been hiding money from her. Mike, facing the possibility of losing everything, had a new plan. Use the DNA results to file for legal recognition as our biological father, hoping that establishing paternity over 3 successful adult children, Daniel's a surgeon, Ryan runs his own company, and I'm a partner at my law firm, might somehow entitle him to a financial claim, or at the very least, give him somewhere soft to land when his own life came crashing down. The DNA test hadn't been some innocent ancestry hobby after all. Mike had encouraged my dad to take it. He'd practically gifted him the kit for his birthday, knowing exactly what it would reveal, timing the reveal for a moment of maximum chaos, a full family gathering, right before the holidays, when emotions and money and family loyalty would all be tangled together and easiest to manipulate. He wanted to blow up my parents' marriage. He wanted my mother to fall apart and turn to him. And he wanted 3 new children, successful, established, financially comfortable ones to potentially factor into his own crumbling future. When I found that out, something in me went ice cold and completely focused. Because now this wasn't just about grief or betrayal anymore. This was about a man trying to weaponize my family's pain for his own financial survival. I'm a lawyer. I don't just get angry, I get strategic. That night, I called Daniel and Ryan into a group call, and I laid it all out. Not the emotional side, we'd already drowned in that for 2 straight days, but the practical side. Biological paternity claimed decades after the fact, on adult children who already have a legal father on their birth certificates, is an incredibly weak legal position. But weak doesn't mean harmless. A man desperate enough to blow up a 30-year friendship for money is desperate enough to drag us through court just to make our lives miserable enough to pay him off. So I decided we weren't going to wait for him to make the first move. I spent the next 4 days doing what I do best, building a case. I pulled together everything, the timeline of the DNA kit purchase, which I got by simply asking my dad to check his email order history. And there it was, a gift receipt, purchased by Michael R. Doyle, sent directly to my father's address 2 months before Thanksgiving. I got copies of old family photos showing Mike present at every major milestone, which established just how deeply embedded and calculated his position in our lives had always been. And I reached out, carefully, to my Aunt Patricia. This is the part that still makes my chest tight. Patricia had no idea. She'd been married to Mike for 26 years and had no clue he'd fathered 3 children with his best friend's wife. When I gently told her what we'd discovered, she went quiet for almost a full minute. Then she said something I'll never forget. I always thought there was something off about how he looked at your mother at parties. I told myself I was being paranoid. Patricia wasn't just hurt, she was furious. And she had something we didn't: years of financial records and recent proof that Mike had been quietly moving money into a separate account for the last 8 months, right around the time he'd been planning his little DNA gift. Here's the twist that turned this whole nightmare into something almost satisfying. Patricia's lawyer found that Mike had drained nearly $80,000 from their joint retirement account without her knowledge, funneling it into a private account opened under a slightly misspelled version of his own name. He wasn't just planning to use us emotionally, he was already hiding assets, preparing for a divorce he assumed he'd win by playing the sympathetic, wronged husband. A role that would collapse instantly if anyone found out about the affair, the hidden money, and the manipulated DNA reveal. Patricia decided, right then, that she wasn't interested in a quiet divorce anymore. Meanwhile, my dad was handling his own reckoning. He didn't yell, he didn't throw my mother out, though honestly, a part of me expected him to. Instead, he did something so quietly devastating that it told me everything about the kind of man he really is. He asked my mother to move into the guest room. He told her he needed time, not drama. He kept coming to our family dinners because, in his words, the kids didn't do anything wrong, and I'm not going to let this take away the one thing that was always real: being their father. I cried more over that sentence than I did over the entire DNA reveal. 2 weeks after Thanksgiving, everything came to a head. Mike, apparently sensing that things weren't going according to his plan, showed up unannounced at my parents' brownstone, asking to talk things through as a family. My dad let him in, which honestly took more restraint than I think I could have managed, and I made sure I was there too, along with Daniel and Ryan. 4-1. Mike tried to play it soft at first, talking about how he'd always cared about us, how finding out he might be our biological father had been overwhelming too, how maybe we could all find a way to build a relationship going forward. That's when I laid the folder on the table. The gift receipt, the timeline, the photos, and a printed summary, courtesy of Patricia's lawyer, of the $80,000 he'd quietly moved before staging his big, emotional reveal. I watched a 29-year friendship, a fake uncle relationship, and an entire carefully built persona collapse in real time across his face. "This isn't about family," I told him, keeping my voice as steady and controlled as I could manage in a courtroom. "This was never about family. You saw an opportunity, 3 successful kids, a crumbling marriage, and a best friend too kind to ever suspect you, and you decided to cash it in. You didn't give my dad that DNA kit out of curiosity. You gave it to him because you needed a financial parachute, and you were willing to detonate my entire family to get it." Mike didn't deny it. He just sat there, pale, the same way my mother had been at that Thanksgiving table 2 weeks earlier. "Patricia knows about the money," Ryan added, arms crossed, using the calm, clipped tone he usually saves for closing a business deal. "Her lawyer already has copies of everything. If you try to file for any kind of legal paternity claim, or come near this family again looking for money, we hand all of it, the affair, the account, the timing of that DNA kit, straight to her divorce attorney, and let a judge decide how much of your remaining assets you get to keep." Mike left that afternoon and never came back. Patricia filed for divorce 3 weeks later, and thanks to the financial misconduct, she walked away with far more than a standard split. My mother is still in that guest room. My dad hasn't decided what happens next, and none of us are pushing him. This is his decision, on his own timeline, after 34 years of loving 3 children who weren't biologically his, and never once making us feel like that mattered. It's been 3 months since that Thanksgiving. Mike is divorced, financially gutted, and last I heard, living alone in a rental across town. Patricia sends my mom a Christmas card every year. Still turns out betrayal has a strange way of making 2 women closer than the men who caused it. My mother is still trying to earn back trust one day at a time, and to her credit, she hasn't run from it. She shows up. She answers every hard question we throw at her, even the ones that make her cry. And my dad, my real dad, the only father I've ever known or ever will, he's still in that same brownstone, still lights his cinnamon candles every November, still remembers every birthday down to the exact restaurant we went to that year. Blood never made him our father. Showing up every single day for 34 years did that. Here's what I've learned from all of this. Family isn't a DNA report. It's not a percentage on a lab printout. It's who stays when staying gets hard, who chooses you again and again without needing a reason written in your genetic code. My dad chose us before he even knew the truth, and he chose us even harder after he learned it. That's not something a paternity test can ever take away. But I still think about that moment at the table, watching a man's entire understanding of his life shatter in front of him, and wondering if uncovering the whole ugly truth, dragging Mike's scheme into the light, exposing my mother's decades-long secret in front of everyone, was really the right call, or if some truths are better left buried for the sake of peace. So here's my question for you, the one I still ask myself some nights. Am I in the wrong for needing the truth so badly that I was willing to blow up everything to get it? Would you have done the same thing in my position, or would you have let it go? If this story moved you, hit that subscribe button, because trust me, my family has more chapters than just this one. Drop a comment and tell me honestly, am I in the wrong? I read every single one of them, and I promise, your answer might change how I see this whole thing.